Hi, good morning. Thank you so much, Melissa. I'm so excited to be here and honored to be here to be part of your career journey here at Dermalogica. So I know Heather touched a little bit earlier on your resume and interview, but I'm going to dive in a bit deeper and give you really tips on how to nail your interview for a changing industry. All right, so before we get to the interview, I want to talk about building a modern resume because that's what's going to get you to the interview, right? So some key points here on how to build or what's the anatomy of a perfect resume. So these are going to be some key points that you want to either think about or have on your resume. So the first thing I want to talk about is design matters. And what I mean about that is make sure to keep your resume simple. As a recruiter, sometimes we're reviewing hundreds of resumes a day, and we're humans, so our eyes get tired. We're not AIs, so we can't just, act like a computer. So our eyes do get tired, and so when you have intricate designs on your resume, it makes it hard to read. So I would recommend a couple of things. Make sure you're choosing a font that's easy to read, no cursive fonts. Make sure that your font is at least 11 points or bigger because you don't want your recruiters squinting. And for me, I'm getting older and my eyes are not getting any better. So, font size matters a lot to me. And then make sure that there's sufficient white space on your resume. You don't want to crowd your resume. So make sure that your margins are at least, I would say, 3/4 of an inch or bigger. I would say generally between 3/4 of an inch to 1 inch. Number two is be reachable. Make sure that you have your contact information at the top of your resume. I can't even tell you how many times I've reviewed resumes, and sometimes what I do as a recruiter is I'll print off a bunch of resumes and I'll review them one right after the other. And then I come across a resume that, I love, and they meet all the qualifications and the experience. And guess what? I can't find their contact information. So what do? I then put that resume aside to revisit later, and I continue through my stack. Because then I have to, messes up with my flow if I, have to then stop and go into the applicant tracking system. However, when that happens, that means that your resume is going to be reviewed later, and they might come across someone else's resume that really meets the qualifications, and they're going to call that person first. So you want to be that person that they call first. So make sure you're reachable. Make sure that you have your cell phone on there and your email. One note about street or home address. You don't necessarily need to list your full home address on your resume. I know nowadays there's a lot of concerns with identity theft, and with your resume, a lot of times you're posting it on public forums like Indeed or Monster or LinkedIn. So I would say that instead of putting your full home address on there, just list the city and state so that the recruiter knows where you reside and if you're within the vicinity for the role that they're recruiting for. Number three, show off your skills. So as a recruiter, what we're looking for first and foremost is if the candidate has the skills that we're looking for in this role. So what I would recommend is list your key skills at the top of your resume. Make it easy for them to find, put it front and center. You can list both soft skills, hard skills. It doesn't really matter how you list it, but list it at the very top and make it easy for them to spot. Don't make them hunt for this critical information. Number four, list your experience. I know Heather touched a little bit on experience as well, but list your experience. And what I say first is start with list in reverse chronological order, meaning that you're going to put your current or most recent position first and work backwards from there. And generally, a good rule of thumb is to go back about 5 to 7 years. Beyond that, it's either not relevant unless you took a break in employment, then you can list stuff beyond that. But really, beyond that, you can just discuss in the interview. When you're listing out your experience, a couple of key things to include are the company name, of course, your title, your job title there, and then your dates of employment. With dates of employment, make sure you list the month and the year. You don't have to list the day itself, but at least month and year. And then with your experience, I prefer to see experience in bulleted format here versus a paragraph because it just makes it easier for the recruiters to read and really pull out what your key skills and responsibilities were in that role. And then number five, quantify your experience. If you can, use concrete data points. And what I mean by that is, especially as a skin therapist, you might list maybe your client retention rate, your rebooking rate, your retail sales, your average retail sales per day or per client. Those are skills or concrete data points that really will give the recruiter more scope and context of your experience. Number six, include other positions. I know this is what Heather touched on about earlier. If you have limited work experience, and especially, in this case, you're coming out of school, you might not have any experience in the industry. So list other experience that you have. It doesn't matter if it's not relevant, but what you can do is showcase skills that you can transfer to this new position, just like Heather mentioned before. Number 7, education, get the grade, right? A lot of positions in this industry, of course, are going to require either a license or a degree. You'll either need a aesthetics license or a cosmetology license. If you're applying for, maybe corporate positions, you might need a degree in addition to that. So make sure you list that on your resume. A lot of times, if you have it and you don't list it, and recruiters are going through and seeing if you meet the qualifications, they're not going to see that, and they're going to mark you, they're going to put you in the unqualified pile, even though you might be qualified. So you don't want to get put in that pile. Number 8, the extra stuff. Now, this is only if you have extra space on your resume, then you can include an additional experience section that really catches everything else. In this section, you include things like professional associations that you're a part of. You can include volunteer experience. You can include awards that you've received, those sorts of things. Not necessarily to fill up the rest of your resume, but just to add a little bit of color to your resume. But again, only include this if you have extra space. If not, leave it off. Number 9, keep it concise. I still get questions nowadays that ask me, well, how long should a resume be? To me, I like to still keep it and see resumes that are 1 to 2 pages max. And really, you should really try to stick with 1, unless you have, 20 years of experience, then you might need that second page. But otherwise, keep it to 1 page. Now, here are some pro tips on for your resume. Like I said before, make it presentable and easy to follow. Tailor your resume. And what I mean by this is, take a look at the job description, look at what they're actually looking for, what some of the key skills are, and mirror that on your resume. I'm not saying you have to copy everything word for word, but some positions might focus more on retail skills. Other positions might focus more on the types of treatments that you performed, or maybe the types of products you've worked with. So tailor your resume to what the job is that you're looking for or that you're applying for. Be specific. And this really comes in when you're listing out your key responsibilities. Instead of saying, I worked in a spa setting, you could say, I perform treatments and I average, 10 clients per day with an average of $100 of retail sales per client. So that's really specific, and that really gives a recruiter more information, and they'll be more willing to call you than someone else that just says, I worked in a spa setting. Use action verbs. So instead of saying I'm responsible for, you can say words like I managed or coordinated or led or performed. So these are going to be words that will really catch the recruiter's eyes as well. And then stand out with a cover letter. I know a lot of people, ask me, is a cover letter really critical or necessary? To be honest, I say yes. For me, when I look at resumes, I actually look to see if they write a cover letter or not, because a resume will really give the recruiter a glance at what your work experience is. But a cover letter, that's where you're going to showcase your personality and your experience, but really give them some color and showcase your enthusiasm too. Show why you're so excited to work for Dermalogica or whatever company you're applying for. And then lastly, proofread. And then ask at least 2 or 3 other people to proofread for you as well. Because when you're looking at the same thing day in and day out, trying to make it perfect, you're bound to miss stuff, right? So have other people proofread it for you too. Now let's talk about nailing the interview. So first, before the interview, here are a couple of things you want to do. Number 1, research the company and your interviewers. So where you can go on to do this is, the company website. You can go on LinkedIn, sometimes even Indeed, but really get to know the company, maybe even the history, what some of their main products or services are, and then get to know your interviewers if you can. There's a high likelihood that your interviewers will have a profile on LinkedIn. So go look up your recruiters, the hiring managers, and really get to know what their background is like. Study the job description. You want to make sure you know exactly what you're applying for. But also in studying the job description, this will help you prepare some questions to ask later on, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. Practice your speaking voice and your body language. A lot of times, recruiters, they're not just listening to you, they're watching you as well, watching how you carry yourself, how you present. yourself. So make sure you practice your speaking voice and body language, whether it's to yourself in the mirror or to your dog or your husband or boyfriend, whatever. But just make sure you practice that. And then practice your answers to common interview questions. What I would recommend is go online and Google it. There's tons of common interview questions online, but just pick some that that you want to think about and maybe more difficult to answer on the spot, but have those answers ready so that you're not scrambling and you're not just trying to figure out what to say on the spot. And then come prepared with examples of your work. When recruiters ask interview questions, we often want to know what you've done in your past, right? So we'll actually ask you to give us specific examples of things that you've done in the past. For example, give me an example of, how you solved when you had a difficult customer, how you solved that issue or, problem, right? So just make sure you're prepared with examples of your work. And then plan your interview attire the night before. You don't want to scramble the morning of. So get out your attire, your clothes, iron them, steam them, whatever you got to do, but plan it the night before. So that's one less thing for you to think about the day of. And then, of course, like I mentioned, I was going to talk about prepare several interview questions. So some areas that you want to prepare questions on are the job, the company, and the culture. Asking questions, when you're in an interview, it's really a two-way street. They're interviewing you as much as you're interviewing them to make sure that it's going to be the right fit for you too, right? So you want to make sure that you ask all the questions that you need to know to see if this is going to be the right fit for you. But also when you do ask questions at the end of the interview, it also signals to the recruiter or the hiring manager that you're really interested in this role and learning more about it. So, ask questions about the job. You might want to ask, what are some challenges that you see in this position? What are the growth opportunities, for this role? What's the career path? Some questions to ask about the company is maybe ask about what are some of the goals in the company and, how does this position relate to those goals? Where do they see the company heading in the next couple of years? And the culture, what is the company culture like? What's the environment like? What are the team dynamics like that you're going to be working on? So those are some questions you can definitely Google, and there's tons of resources available online as well. Now it's time for the interview. So make sure you arrive on time or early. You don't want to get lost and arrive late. So make sure you plan plenty of time, and especially if you're in the LA area, there's traffic it's always unpredictable. So make sure you plan extra time for that. Bring an extra copy of your resume. If you're going and interviewing with a larger company like Dermalogica or another corporation, it might not be necessary because a lot of times they're going digital. We've gone digital here. But if you're going to a spa or a salon, they may not have time to print your resume because they may be, interviewing you in between clients. But they may not have a printer at the spa, right? So just bring an extra copy just in case. Take a deep breath. Like I said, the interview is really a two-way street. It's a conversation for you to get to know them just as much as for them to get to know you. So just take a deep breath and think of it as a conversation. Strike a power pose. So I don't know if you guys have ever heard of Amy Cuddy, but she has done a TED Talk on striking a power pose. And what this is when you're not feeling confident, if you strike that power pose, it just gives you more confidence. And, it's kind of like the fake it till you make it kind of thing, but it'll also often have an impact on success as well. So strike a power pose and know that, you'll do great in it. And of course, smile and introduce yourself when you get, when you meet the recruiter or the hiring manager. All right, some pro tips. Nowadays, you might come across some video interviews as well, especially if you're interviewing for Dermalogica. A lot of times we start with video interviews. So here are some tips if you are doing a video interview. So first, check your technology, make sure that it works, whether you're connecting on your mobile device, laptop, computer, desktop, whatever it is, make sure that you check your technology ahead of time. Have good lighting. The last thing you want to do is sit in a dark room, or you're sitting outside and there's too much light and they can't see you either. I've seen both cases, so make sure that you have good lighting. A professional background. You don't want any distractions in the background because you want them to really be focused on you. So if you can, get yourself in a quiet space, but also have just a professional looking background as well. I just mentioned quiet space, limit the distractions. I know especially if you're doing a video interview, you might be at home with kids running around, pets running around. So try to get into a quiet space, shut the door for the 30 minutes or an hour that you're going to be on the video with them. And then just limit those distractions. Turn off your notifications on your phone, especially if you're using your phone to do the video interview. Make sure that you turn on the do not disturb feature so that your notifications aren't coming through while you're on the interview. And of course, make sure you have good internet connection. If you can hardwire into your modem. If not, just make sure that you're near the Wi-Fi router so that you don't get disconnected during your interview. Appropriate clothing, even though you're on a video interview, you do want to make sure that you dress appropriately, at least from the top up or wherever you're going to be, on camera, right? I think we've all seen the, different clips of like newscasters, during COVID, and you see, inappropriate bottoms. So you don't want to be that person. And of course, be on time, even though it's an interview, a video, especially because it's a video interview, you're not dealing with traffic or anything. Make sure you're on time or at least a couple of minutes early. And then look in the camera and then maintain your focus. You don't want to have your eyes darting around because there's different things going in the background. Just really keep your focus and, focus on the interview and look in the camera. Trade test skills. So I know Heather mentioned this earlier. So you want to, make sure that going into the interview, ask the interviewer what you can expect, what's going to be expected of you during the interview. Will you have to do a trade test? And then if so, what are they going to test you on? It might be, skin analysis skills. It might be, doing a treatment. It might be performing a massage, depending on what you're applying for. So then ask the recruiter that ahead of time so that you can then practice at home before you get to the interview. At Dermalogica, when we interview for instructors, as Melissa can tell you, we ask them to do a presentation. So I know they have to put together a presentation and then they practice it and then they present in front of us. So, know what's expected of you before you go into it and then practice it. Some final advice. So references, make sure that you do have references, professional references on hand. You don't have to hand them over to the recruiter until you've progressed further in the interview process when they ask for it. Usually it's during the application process, but make sure you have professional references on hand. And then when they do ask for your references, make sure that you also give your references a heads up that they might receive a call from the employer so that they know to expect it and they're not caught off guard. Check your voicemail and email for messages. I know a lot of times I've left messages and emails and people, don't necessarily respond, whether it's, maybe some people just don't check voicemail. Email, check your spam folder. I know a lot of times, sometimes our emails will get into people's spam folders. So make sure that you check both every week. Social pages, know what's on your public social pages, or if you want, make your social pages like Instagram, Facebook, make them private, or if they're public, just make sure that you have appropriate information on there, right? And then Google yourself. If you've never done this, I recommend everyone to do it. You just want to know what's out there. You never know. And it may just be someone with your same name, but just Google yourself and make sure that you know what's out on the internet. There's been a couple of times when someone did not know something was out there about them and they were very surprised. So just do that. It takes 2 minutes. And then thank you email. Following your interview, make sure that you send a thank you email or even a note card. It doesn't have to be a note card, but an email works best if you can within, I would say, about 24 hours of your interview. Just to follow up, thank the recruiter, the hiring manager, whoever you're interviewed with. And then also in your thank you email, this is your opportunity to really tell them again why you're so excited and enthusiastic and about this role and why you'd be the perfect fit for this role, especially after learning more about it. And then lastly, follow up. If you haven't heard back from them in a week or two, usually they'll tell you when to expect a call back. And if that time passes and you still haven't heard back from them, follow up with an email or a call. That doesn't hurt. But yeah, those are all my final tips for today, and hopefully that'll really help you guys get ready to nail your interview. And now I'll pass it back to Melissa.